What happens when the people who are supposed to be your greatest defenders, your anchors in life, the ones who held your hand when you stumbled and celebrated your victories, suddenly turn around and decide they've had enough? What happens when your father, your sister, and even your mother, yes, your mother, break their silence all at once, and the world leans in to hear what they have to say? That's exactly the storm that's brewing around Meghan Markle right now. And make no mistake, it is not just another tabloid squabble. This is personal. This is raw. And this could be the most devastating blow to Meghan's carefully crafted image yet. The opening question isn't rhetorical, it's a reality check. Imagine being Meghan for a moment. You've fought tooth and nail to create a narrative of yourself as a survivor, a victim of relentless scrutiny, a woman who stood bravely against the might of the British monarchy. You've built your brand on resilience, compassion, and authenticity. And then, suddenly, the very people who know you most intimately, the ones who shared your bloodline, your childhood, your family secrets, come forward to say, "That's not the Meghan we know." How does one recover from that? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about Thomas Markle, the man who once proudly raised his daughter, scrimping and saving to give her the best life he could. The world remembers him as the father she left behind. But his story is more complicated than that. Think about Samantha Markle, the half-sister who has been dismissed as jealous and bitter. But what if her words cut closer to the truth than Meghan would ever admit? And then think about Doria Ragland, the ever-loyal mother, the quiet one, the woman Meghan showcased as her bedrock of love and stability. What happens when even that silence cracks? The power of this story lies in betrayal. Not the kind of betrayal that comes from enemies or strangers. That's easy to dismiss. This is betrayal at its most intimate. It's family betrayal. And family betrayal cuts deeper than any headline, any palace intrigue, any gossip column. Because when your own blood says you've abandoned, disowned, or mistreated them, it's no longer about he said, she said. It's about identity. It's about who you really are when the cameras stop rolling. Now let's pause and ask, why does this matter now? Haven't we heard versions of these stories before? Haven't Thomas and Samantha already been paraded across TV interviews, spilling grievances? Haven't tabloids recycled the estranged Markle family angle 100 times? Yes, but the timing now is different. Because Meghan's entire brand, her Netflix deals, her podcast attempts, her return to Hollywood circles, hinges on the credibility of her personal narrative. The compassionate warrior, the survivor of cruelty, the woman wronged. If her family's collective voice starts chipping away at that foundation, everything she has built could collapse. And here's the irony that makes it so gripping. Meghan has always positioned herself as someone abandoned by others. Abandoned by her father. Abandoned by the royals. Abandoned by a cruel press. But what her family is saying flips that script entirely. They're not accusing her of being abandoned. They're accusing her of doing the abandoning. Think about how powerful that reversal is. Suddenly Meghan isn't the victim. She's the perpetrator. Not the abandoned, but the abandoner. And that shift could change everything. Let's look at Thomas Markle first. His story is painful. Here is a father who, for years, supported his daughter financially and emotionally, only to be painted as a liability and cut off completely when Meghan rose to fame. To the public, Meghan's narrative was that Thomas betrayed her trust by speaking to tabloids, by staging photos. But Thomas's counterclaim is heartbreaking, that he was driven to desperation, that he wanted to stay connected, and that Meghan severed the bond without looking back. Is that the action of a compassionate daughter, or of someone who saw her family as disposable the moment they became inconvenient? And then there's Samantha Markle, often brushed off as an outsider with a vendetta. But here's the unsettling part. Some of her claims echo eerily with what others have whispered behind closed doors. She describes Meghan as manipulative, controlling, even cruel. The opposite of the victim card Meghan plays in public. Samantha accuses Meghan of rewriting her own history, painting herself as a child of hardship while ignoring the privileges Thomas worked hard to provide. The audience has to ask, is this bitterness, or is there truth hidden in plain sight? But perhaps the most shocking piece isn't Thomas or Samantha at all. It's Doria Ragland. For years, Meghan has held Doria up as the symbol of loyalty and love. She was the lone family member at the royal wedding. She was the mother Meghan always claimed would never betray her. But silence can only last so long, and whispers of tension between Meghan and Doria are beginning to surface. What could drive a mother and daughter apart, especially after everything Meghan has claimed about their closeness? If Doria truly feels the strain of Meghan's choices, then it's not just a father or sister pointing fingers. It's the one person Meghan swore she would never lose. And that changes everything. This is where the story goes from scandalous to seismic. Because if Meghan cannot even maintain the loyalty of her mother, then the entire narrative she's built crumbles. A mother's disapproval carries a weight no critic or journalist ever could. And while Doria may not have spoken loudly, even the cracks in her support are enough to send shockwaves. Because silence, when broken, speaks volumes. Now let's tie this into a bigger truth. When you rise to fame, the world expects you to lose some friendships, to cut off some connections. That's almost a given. But family? Family is supposed to be sacred. Family is supposed to be untouchable. And Meghan's story isn't just one of drift. It's one of deliberate severing. Father gone. Sister dismissed. Mother strained. Royals estranged. Harry isolated. The pattern is clear, and it raises a chilling question. Is Meghan's power rooted not in unity, but in isolation? Think about how this plays out for Harry as well. If Meghan can cut off her own father, her own sister, her own mother, then what does that say about the man who gave up everything for her? Will Harry eventually find himself in the same position, discarded when he no longer fits the narrative? The audience is left with an uneasy feeling. If blood ties can be severed so coldly, then marriage bonds may not stand a chance. This isn't just gossip. This isn't just another celebrity feud. This is a mirror being held up to fame itself. How much of Meghan's public persona is authentic, and how much is performance? Is she truly a victim of circumstance, or has she carefully crafted that identity while burning every bridge that stood in her way? The betrayal of family doesn't just expose Meghan. It exposes the machinery of image-making in Hollywood and royalty alike. And that's why this story matters now. Because it's not just about Meghan and her family. It's about the cost of ambition. It's about what happens when the people who loved you most decide the world needs to know who you really are. It's about the danger of crafting a public mask while ignoring the voices of those left behind. But here's the twist, the cliffhanger that keeps us hooked. The most shocking part isn't Thomas. It isn't Samantha. It isn't even Doria's distance. The most shocking part is what comes next. Because when all three voices, father, sister, mother, begin to echo the same haunting message, the question becomes impossible to ignore. If even your family calls you out, can the world still believe in you? And what happens when the carefully built castle of image begins to crumble under the weight of truth? That's where our story is headed. But before we get there, let's begin with the father's tale, the silence he held for years, the heartbreak he endured, and the moment he finally decided to let the world know what he really thinks of his daughter. Because once you hear Thomas Markle's side, you'll realize this story isn't just scandal, it's tragedy. And what comes after will shake everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle. What happens when a father's love collides with his daughter's ambition? What happens when the man who once worked day and night to provide a stable life, who celebrated every milestone, who quietly stood in the background while his daughter pursued dreams of stardom, suddenly becomes the villain in her story? That is the haunting question at the center of Thomas Markle's narrative, a tale of pride, heartbreak, and ultimately betrayal. And when you hear the full story, you may find yourself asking, did Meghan abandon her father, or did her father fail her? Or is the truth far more complicated than either side wants to admit? Thomas Markle's story doesn't begin with controversy. It begins with love. He wasn't just any father. He was a man who worked behind the scenes in Hollywood as a lighting director, a man whose hard work lit up the sets of sitcoms and gave him a decent living to support his family. He wasn't royalty, and he wasn't wealthy by celebrity standards, but he had enough to send Meghan to private schools, enough to fund opportunities that would later shape her into the woman who caught the attention of a prince. In fact, Meghan herself once credited her father for supporting her acting ambitions. Imagine being Thomas in those early days, sitting in school auditoriums, clapping for his daughter, believing that his sacrifices were building her future. But here's where it turns. As Meghan's fame grew, Thomas's role shifted from proud father to problematic figure. The world remembers the staged paparazzi photos. Thomas, caught on camera getting fitted for a suit, reading articles about Meghan in an internet cafe, looking like the ordinary dad preparing for his daughter's royal wedding. At first glance, it looked innocent, even sweet. But the revelation that these photos were staged shattered everything. Suddenly, Thomas wasn't a proud father. He was a man accused of selling out his daughter for money and attention. The narrative flipped overnight. Now, pause for a moment. Put yourself in Thomas's shoes. He claims he was misled, pressured, even tricked into those photos by people who promised it would improve his public image. He says he wanted to look respectable for Meghan's wedding, to not appear as though he was a recluse or an embarrassment. But the fallout was catastrophic. Instead of showing up proudly at St. George's Chapel, Thomas ended up in the hospital with heart problems. He never walked Meghan down the aisle. And from that moment forward, the divide became permanent. The audience has to ask, was that fair? Was Thomas truly the villain? Or was he a desperate father who made a terrible mistake under crushing media pressure? Meghan's defenders argue she had every right to cut ties. But Thomas himself insists the punishment didn't fit the crime. One misstep, he claims, cost him a relationship with his daughter forever. Let's go deeper, because the heartache only intensifies. After the wedding, Thomas tried repeatedly to reach out. He called. He wrote letters. He spoke through intermediaries. And yet, by his account, Meghan never responded. He says she abandoned him, left him in silence, even while knowing he was battling health problems. In interviews, his words are heavy. I've been ghosted by my daughter. Think about that term, ghosted. It's the language of disposable relationships, of casual dating, of people who vanish without explanation. To hear a father use it about his daughter is chilling. But what makes Thomas's silence breaking so compelling is not just his pain, it's his sense of betrayal. He claims that after years of supporting Meghan, financially and emotionally, she erased him from her story the moment she stepped into royal life. He wasn't invited to her new world. He wasn't embraced by the institution. Instead, he became a liability. And in his mind, Meghan chose her image over her father. That's not just abandonment. That's betrayal. Now, let's bring in some emotional spikes. Consider this contradiction. Meghan has spoken openly about the importance of compassion, kindness, and mental health. She has built her public image on empathy. And yet, here is her father, saying he was cut off in his darkest hour. The irony is sharp. The woman who champions connection and healing allegedly severed her own. Can both realities exist at once? Or is one side telling a story that's far more self-serving? This isn't to say Thomas is blameless. His critics argue that by speaking to the press, by repeatedly airing grievances publicly, he fueled the estrangement. Every new interview, every fresh accusation, pushed Meghan further away. And yet, Thomas defends himself by saying he had no choice. That silence only brought him pain, and speaking out was his only way of being heard. The tragedy here is undeniable. A father and daughter, locked in a cycle of hurt, both accusing the other of betrayal, neither willing to bend. Let's not forget the global stage this played out on. Unlike ordinary family feuds, this wasn't private. It was broadcast across tabloids, dissected on TV, tweeted around the world. Meghan's royal status magnified every misstep, every quote, every photograph. Imagine being Thomas. Every time he spoke, he was either painted as a victim or a villain. And Meghan, equally, saw every headline as another wound to her carefully built image. No wonder the divide grew wider. But here's where the story twists. Because Thomas's silence, his years of staying relatively quiet compared to Samantha's louder critiques, was always held up as a kind of loyalty. He wasn't constantly attacking Meghan in the early years. He still hoped for reconciliation. He still imagined a phone call, an invitation, a chance to meet Harry properly, to meet his grandchildren. That hope carried him. And yet, as time passed, silence hardened into bitterness. When Thomas finally began speaking openly, it wasn't the voice of a man seeking reunion. It was the voice of a man who had given up. And that's where we are today. Thomas Markle, once a proud father, now speaks of his daughter with a mixture of sorrow and sharpness. He says she has disowned him, that she has abandoned her roots, that fame and royalty mean more to her than family. Whether you believe him or not, one thing is undeniable. The pain in his voice is real. And pain, when left to fester, turns into something darker, resentment. So let's pose a question directly to you, the audience. If you were Meghan, would you forgive your father for staging those photos, for speaking to the press, for embarrassing you at a pivotal moment? Or would you shut the door forever, believing that trust, once broken, can never be restored? And if you were Thomas, would you accept being cut off completely for one mistake? Or would you fight, as he has, to make your story heard, even if it meant losing your daughter forever? This is what makes Thomas's tale so tragic. It isn't clear-cut. He isn't purely villain or purely victim. Neither is Meghan. Both sides feel justified, and both sides have inflicted wounds that may never heal. But here's the chilling part. Thomas isn't the only one speaking. His story, as heartbreaking as it is just the beginning. Because if a father's pain wasn't enough to sway Meghan, what happens when a sister's voice joins the chorus? That's where we turn next. Samantha Markle, the half-sister long dismissed as bitter and jealous, has her own story to tell. And her accusations go beyond heartbreak. They cut straight to the heart of Meghan's character. And what she reveals makes Thomas's story look like just the prologue. What happens when the sibling you grew up with, the one who watched you through awkward childhood years and early ambitions, finally decides to tell the world that your carefully polished image is a lie? What happens when your half-sister, who has lived in your shadow for decades, steps into the spotlight not to celebrate you, but to dismantle you piece by piece? That's exactly the storm that follows Samantha Markle, and whether you love her or hate her, her words cut deep into Meghan's narrative. Samantha Markle is not quiet. She never has been. While Thomas held on to silence for a time, hoping for reconciliation, Samantha did the opposite. She has been loud, relentless, unapologetic. She has branded Meghan not as a victim, but as a manipulator, not as a compassionate humanitarian, but as a cold and calculating social climber. And what makes her perspective so gripping isn't just the bitterness of an estranged sibling. It's the unnerving way her accusations line up with whispers we've already heard from others. Let's start at the beginning. Samantha and Meghan share the same father, Thomas Markle, but they didn't grow up side by side. Samantha was already an adult when Meghan was still a child. Their lives weren't intertwined in the way most siblings' lives are, but they knew enough about each other to matter. And for Samantha, watching Meghan rise into global fame was both fascinating and infuriating. Imagine seeing your younger half-sister ascend into Hollywood, marry a prince, and capture the world's attention, while you're painted as irrelevant, erased from the family story. For Samantha, Meghan's success wasn't just about achievement. It was about being written out of history. That's where the first accusation comes in, erasure. Samantha has often accused Meghan of pretending she grew up in hardship, as if she had no family support, no connections. Meghan's carefully crafted public story emphasizes struggle, working jobs, fighting to get roles, surviving as an outsider. But Samantha argues that isn't true. She says Meghan was raised in comfort, given private schooling, supported by their father's hard work. She had everything she needed, Samantha insists, and yet she rewrites her life to look like a victim. Pause on that for a moment. The accusation isn't just about lying. It's about identity theft. If Meghan is indeed reinventing her own past to fit a more dramatic narrative, then the very foundation of her public persona crumbles. And that's what makes Samantha's voice so dangerous to Meghan. It comes from someone who can say, I was there. I know the truth. But Samantha doesn't stop at accusing Meghan of exaggerating hardships. She paints her half-sister as manipulative and cruel. She has described Meghan as someone who uses people to climb social ladders, discarding them once they are no longer useful. Does that sound familiar? Because that's exactly what Thomas claims Meghan did to him. Already, we're seeing a disturbing pattern. A father says he was discarded. A sister says she was erased. And both stories, though told from different perspectives, echo each other. Now, let's add emotional depth. Samantha has lived with multiple sclerosis for years, confined to a wheelchair at times, battling health challenges. And she says that during her struggles, Meghan showed no compassion. The woman who champions global compassion, who tells the world to be kind, allegedly turned her back on her own disabled sister. That accusation hits hard, because compassion isn't measured in speeches or interviews. It's measured in how you treat those closest to you when they're suffering. For years, Doria has been silent, loyal, present at Meghan's side when no one else was. She was the exception to the Markle family estrangement, the proof that Meghan could still hold one parent close. But even Doria's silence has limits, and whispers of strain between mother and daughter have begun to surface. If Doria truly steps forward, if her silence truly breaks, then Meghan faces not just a father's grief or a sister's bitterness, but the quiet judgment of her mother. And when a mother speaks, the world cannot ignore it. Because what comes next could be the most devastating revelation yet. What happens when the one person you thought would never turn against you, the one figure you always believed was unshakably loyal, begins to pull back? What happens when even your mother, the woman you held up to the world as your bedrock of love and stability, shows cracks in her silence? That's the question haunting Meghan Markle now. Because while Thomas and Samantha have been loud and unapologetic, it's Doria Ragland's subtle distance, the quiet breaking of her long silence, that carries the greatest sting. Let's step back. From the very beginning of Meghan's royal journey, Doria Ragland was positioned as the counterpoint to the chaos of the Markle family. Thomas and Samantha were painted as unstable, opportunistic, bitter. Doria, by contrast, was serene, dignified, loyal. She was the yoga instructor and social worker who raised Meghan during her formative years. She was the lone parent at Meghan's wedding, sitting gracefully, a symbol of calm strength. To the world, she was proof that Meghan had at least one anchor in her life. And Meghan leaned into that narrative. She celebrated her mother, held her up as her safe haven, her closest confidant. But here's the twist. Silence can be louder than words. And Doria's silence, once seen as loyalty, is now being interpreted very differently. Because silence in the face of chaos can mean support, or it can mean discomfort. And as the storm around Meghan grows, people are asking, is Doria still fully in her daughter's corner? Or has even she begun to step away? Consider this. Meghan's estrangement from Thomas and Samantha was easy to explain publicly. She could frame them as toxic, as exploitative, as people who didn't have her best interests at heart. And many people believe that narrative because, after all, Meghan still had Doria. But what happens when tension creeps into even that bond? Suddenly Meghan doesn't look like the abandoned daughter anymore. She looks like the common denominator in every fractured relationship. Whispers began surfacing quietly, suggesting that Meghan and Doria's relationship wasn't as perfect as it appeared. While Doria remains far more private than Thomas or Samantha, her absence from certain events, her reluctance to speak in Meghan's defense during critical controversies, has fueled speculation. And here's the emotional dagger. If Meghan cannot hold on to her own mother's unwavering support, then the image of her as the loyal daughter crumbles. Ask yourself, why has Doria remained so silent when her daughter has been accused of everything from manipulation to cruelty? If Meghan truly is the compassionate, wronged victim she claims to be, wouldn't a mother be shouting from the rooftops to defend her? Wouldn't she be giving interviews, standing by Meghan's side, setting the record straight? The fact that she hasn't done so speaks volumes. Because silence, in a world of chaos, often means disapproval. Now let's dig into their history. Meghan grew up primarily with Doria after her parents divorced. Doria was the ever-present figure, raising her daughter with love, discipline, and independence. But even as Meghan climbed into Hollywood, Doria's role became quieter. She wasn't the one attending premieres or basking in Meghan's success. She remained in the background, a grounding force. But when Meghan married Harry, suddenly Doria was thrust into the spotlight. She handled it with grace, yes, but did she enjoy it? Or was she uncomfortable with how her daughter's life had turned into a global soap opera? There's a striking irony here. Meghan has often portrayed Doria as the example of loyalty in contrast to her father's betrayal. But what if the reality is more complicated? What if Doria, like Thomas, has also felt shut out or sidelined? What if Meghan, in her rise to power, leaned on her mother when it suited her, but kept her at a distance otherwise? That possibility flips the narrative on its head. The stakes get higher when you consider the rumors of tension between Meghan and Doria regarding Harry. Some whispers suggest that while Doria liked Harry at first, she became uneasy with the way Meghan and Harry isolated themselves from both families. Doria, known for her grounded, spiritual approach to life, may not have fully supported the bitterness Meghan cultivated toward the royal family. If that's true, then Meghan's so-called unshakable bond with her mother is not as unshakable as it appears. Think about the emotional power of this. A father saying his daughter abandoned him is tragic. A sister saying her half-sibling erased her is messy. But a mother showing distance? That's devastating. Because a mother's love is supposed to be unconditional. If even that is questioned, then Meghan's entire narrative collapses. The one safe space she always pointed to becomes fragile, uncertain. Let's explore the contradiction. Meghan has built her image on being a daughter wronged. A woman who endured racism, rejection, cruelty, all while holding close to her loving mother. But if Doria's silence is not loyalty but hesitation, then Meghan no longer has that shield. She's exposed, vulnerable, alone. And the irony couldn't be sharper. The woman who accused the royals of isolating her may have been isolating herself all along, even from her mother. Here's a question for you. If your daughter was facing relentless public attacks, would you remain silent? Would you refuse to defend her, even with a single statement? Or would you, like most parents, run to her side no matter what? Doria's choice of silence, whether intentional or reluctant, forces us to reconsider the dynamic between mother and daughter. And what if Meghan is the one creating the distance? What if her desire to control her public image is so strong that she prefers her mother remain silent rather than risk saying something that doesn't perfectly align with her narrative? That possibility raises another chilling thought. Is Meghan not only controlling her public image, but also controlling the voices of those closest to her? There's also the issue of legacy. Meghan has positioned herself as the woman rewriting royal history, as the one breaking free of toxic cycles. But Doria's silence complicates that. Because if Meghan truly has broken free, why is there so much unresolved tension in every family relationship she has? From Thomas to Samantha to the royals to now even her mother, the pattern suggests not liberation, but destruction. And here's the irony that will stay with you. Meghan, the woman who told the world she was abandoned, may be the one abandoning everyone else, including, perhaps, her mother. But the real shock is still to come. Because while Doria's subtle distance raises questions, the voices of Thomas and Samantha have already begun to paint a much darker picture of Meghan's personality. They claim that behind closed doors, she isn't the compassionate figure she presents to the public. They describe her as manipulative, controlling, even cruel. And when those accusations are combined with the possibility of Doria's quiet unease, the story turns chilling. Because what if Meghan's greatest betrayal isn't her father, or her sister, or even her mother? What if Meghan's greatest betrayal is the mask she wears for the world? The mask of kindness, compassion, and victimhood, while hiding something far darker underneath. And that's where we're headed next. Because the Meghan her family describes is not the Meghan the public sees. And when those two images collide, the result is devastating. What if the Meghan Markle you think you know, the smiling humanitarian, the courageous survivor, the woman who stood up to one of the oldest institutions in the world, is not the Meghan her family knows? What if the glossy, polished persona is only a mask, carefully worn for cameras and interviews, while behind closed doors, a very different character emerges? That is the haunting question at the center of Chapter 4. The two faces of Meghan. From the outside looking in, Meghan's story reads like a fairy tale. A Hollywood actress finds her prince, marries into royalty, and uses her platform to speak on compassion, equality, and empowerment. She's photographed holding Harry's hand, gazing into his eyes, whispering words of solidarity. She talks about mental health, kindness, and changing the world for the better. But behind the curtain, her family paints a picture that is starkly different. They don't describe a fairy tale heroine. They describe someone darker, someone manipulative, controlling, and, in Samantha's words, cold as ice. This clash between public perception and private accusation is what makes Meghan one of the most polarizing figures of our time. Because if her family's claims are true, then Meghan hasn't simply been misunderstood. She has orchestrated one of the most elaborate image plays in recent memory. Let's start with the victim narrative. Meghan has repeatedly framed herself as someone abandoned by her father, by her sister, by the royal family, by the press. It's a narrative designed to evoke sympathy and loyalty. But Thomas, Samantha, And even hints of Doria suggest the opposite, that Meghan is the one doing the abandoning. This is not a small contradiction. It's a complete reversal of roles. Victimhood becomes control. Abandonment becomes strategy. And suddenly, Meghan looks less like the abandoned and more like the abandoner. Here's where the manipulation claims come in. Samantha has often said that Meghan knows how to play a role better than anyone else. That when she's on stage, whether literally as an actress or figuratively as a royal, she embodies warmth and charm. But behind the scenes, Samantha insists, Meghan is calculating every move, every interaction, for her own benefit. Think about that for a moment. If true, then Meghan's kindness isn't kindness, it's performance. Her compassion isn't compassion, it's branding. The irony is chilling. Meghan has accused the royals of being cold, of caring more about appearances than humanity. Yet her family accuses her of doing the exact same thing. The very qualities she criticizes in others are the ones they say define her. That's the hallmark of contradiction, and it's what makes this story so fascinating. Now let's bring in the testimony of former staffers, often referred to as the Sussex survivors. They spoke of Meghan's alleged bullying, her impossible standards, her fiery temper. At the time, Meghan's defenders dismissed it as palace politics, an attempt to smear her reputation. But when you place those claims alongside the voices of her own family, a pattern emerges. It's no longer just disgruntled employees. It's a father, a sister, whispers of a mother, and staff members, all describing the same personality traits. Manipulation, control, ruthlessness. Ask yourself this. Can so many different voices, from so many different corners of her life, all be wrong? Or are we seeing the edges of a truth that Meghan has worked desperately to conceal? Let's use an analogy. Meghan's life is like a movie set. On the stage, under the lights, everything is perfect. The costumes sparkle, the dialogue flows, the audience applauds. But step behind the curtain, and you find the wires, the cracks, the actors collapsing from exhaustion, the truth hidden behind the facade. Meghan's public persona is the stage. Her family's testimony is what happens backstage. And the contrast between the two is staggering. But here's where the emotional punch lands hardest. If Meghan truly is as manipulative as her family claims, then what does that say about Harry? Is he her partner? Or her greatest pawn? Consider this. Harry has walked away from his family, his royal role, his friends, even his country. All for Meghan. Was that purely out of love and conviction? Or was it the result of emotional manipulation? If Meghan could allegedly discard her father, her sister, her Hollywood friends, and perhaps even her mother, then is Harry's fate sealed to follow the same path? This is where betrayal takes on a new layer. It's not just Meghan allegedly betraying her family. It's Meghan potentially betraying her husband, though not in the conventional sense. Not through infidelity, but through control. Through shaping him into a soldier for her narrative, cutting him off from his own support systems. If that's true, then Harry is the ultimate victim in this story. And here's another chilling detail. Meghan's family describes her as someone who thrives on control. Control over her image. Control over her relationships. Control over the narrative. But control is fragile. The moment cracks appear, the moment the mask slips, the entire performance unravels. And Meghan's family, whether intentionally or not, may have been the first to pry at those cracks. This leads to the bigger question. Who is the real Meghan Markle? Is she the compassionate woman the world sees, or the cold manipulator her family accuses her of being? The truth may lie somewhere in between, but perception matters. And when perception begins to tilt, it can collapse everything built upon it. Let's drive the emotional irony home. Meghan, the woman who told Oprah the royal family silenced her, is now accused of silencing her own family. Meghan, the woman who demanded kindness from the world, allegedly showed none to her father or sister. Meghan, the woman who built her brand on empathy, is accused of cruelty. It's contradiction after contradiction, irony after irony, and it leaves us questioning not just Meghan's authenticity, but the authenticity of everything she touches. But here's the cliffhanger. If Meghan's family is right, if her public mask is hiding something darker, then the cost of maintaining that mask is enormous. And the cracks are already showing. Because once the truth begins to leak, whether from Thomas, Samantha, or even Doria, it cannot be contained. The performance collapses. The stage goes dark, and Meghan's carefully built empire of image is at risk of crumbling. And that brings us to the next chapter of this story. Because to truly understand the cost of Meghan's choices, we have to go back. Back to Hollywood. Back to the days before royalty. Back to when ambition was just a dream and family was still in the picture. Because the roots of this betrayal may have started long before the palace. The stage lights are dimming. The cracks in the mask are widening. And what comes next will show us how Meghan's Hollywood dreams may have come at the ultimate price, her family. What if the seeds of Meghan Markle's family estrangement and reputation for ruthlessness weren't planted in the gilded halls of Kensington Palace, but in the palm tree shadows of Hollywood long before she met Prince Harry? What if the story of betrayal didn't begin with the royals at all, but with Meghan's relentless drive to escape obscurity and climb the ladder of fame? Because when you peel back the curtain on her early years in Hollywood, you start to see the same patterns, the ambition, the carefully curated relationships, and yes, the trail of burned bridges. Hollywood, after all, is a place that thrives on reinvention. It rewards those who can perform not just on screen but off it. It's an industry built on image, on charm, on the ability to turn a dinner party handshake into a career-defining role. Meghan stepped into that world as a wide-eyed actress, hungry for success. She was beautiful, articulate, photogenic, the perfect package for an industry that devours fresh faces. But Hollywood is also unforgiving. For every star who rises, 1,000 others fade into anonymity. Meghan wasn't about to be one of the forgotten. In her early days, Meghan played small roles, walk-on parts, brief appearances, background characters. She was a nurse on General Hospital, a briefcase model on Deal or No Deal, a face you saw but didn't remember. But ambition burned in her. Those who knew her then say she was determined to climb, to find the spotlight, to escape the fate of countless aspiring actresses who never made it beyond the casting couch. And to climb in Hollywood often means choosing relationships strategically, cultivating people who can help you, and discarding those who cannot. Sound familiar? Let's pause here. Because this is the very pattern her father and sister accuse her of. Using people until they serve no purpose, then leaving them behind. If Thomas and Samantha are telling the truth, Hollywood was Meghan's training ground for the kind of social maneuvering that would later define her royal chapter. But it wasn't just about climbing. Meghan understood the importance of branding long before the word became fashionable. She started a lifestyle blog, The Tig, where she curated an image of herself as sophisticated, worldly, relatable, yet aspirational. She was building her persona brick by brick, foodie, traveler, humanitarian, intellectual. And it worked. Slowly but surely, Meghan transformed from an unknown actress into a name people began to remember. But here's the cost. In the pursuit of this new persona, the Meghan her family knew seemed to fade away. Samantha claims that even during these early days, Meghan was rewriting her past. She allegedly painted herself as struggling and disconnected, downplaying the comfort of her upbringing, ignoring the sacrifices of her father. The story of the hardworking girl clawing her way to the top sounded better than the story of a girl who attended private schools and enjoyed her father's steady support. Was this exaggeration a harmless branding move, or was it the first betrayal? Her first marriage to Trevor Engelson adds another layer. Meghan and Trevor were together for nearly a decade, first dating while she was still grinding in Hollywood, then marrying in 2011. By all accounts, Trevor supported her career, even helping her get roles. But when Suits catapulted Meghan into the spotlight, things shifted. Friends of Trevor claim Meghan became distant, consumed by her new lifestyle, her new opportunities. And then, just 2 years into marriage, she ended it, reportedly sending Trevor her rings back by mail. Cold, clinical, final. Does that sound familiar? Because it mirrors what Thomas says she did to him. One mistake, one inconvenience, and Meghan allegedly severs ties with finality. No negotiation, no forgiveness. Just silence. To Trevor, the end of the marriage was abrupt, devastating, and shocking. To Meghan, it was simply the next step in her climb. Hollywood, in many ways, became the testing ground for Meghan's persona, the poised, articulate woman with a global outlook. But behind the glitter, there was also a trail of distance. Old friends who said she changed. A husband who said she discarded him. A family that said she erased them. This wasn't the palace's doing. This wasn't the royals' pressure. This was Meghan before royalty. And here's the irony. Meghan has accused the royal family of being an institution obsessed with image, of suffocating her under the weight of appearances. But in Hollywood, she was doing the very same thing, constructing an image, curating relationships, controlling the narrative. The palace may have been stricter, harsher, more formal, but the instinct to perform was already there. Meghan was rehearsing for the biggest role of her life long before she met Harry. So what does this mean? It means that the accusations from her father and sister aren't isolated to royal life. They're not just bitter reactions to her marriage. They're echoes of a pattern that began in Hollywood, a pattern of ambition, reinvention, and control. Meghan wasn't just a victim of royal image-making. She was already an image-maker herself. And here's the haunting question. If Meghan could so easily cut ties with a father, a sister, a husband, and friends in Hollywood, then what's to stop her from cutting ties with Harry when the time comes? If abandonment is her pattern, then Harry may simply be another chapter in a story that always ends the same way. Meghan moving forward, leaving others behind. But the cost of this relentless ambition is clear. Hollywood may reward reinvention, but it doesn't forgive authenticity slips. And the royals, well, they don't forgive betrayal at all. Which is why Meghan's Hollywood training ground is crucial to understand. Because it sets the stage for the next act, the palace. And that's where the story turns from ambition to war. Because Meghan didn't just leave behind her Hollywood friends. She would go on to leave behind the royal family itself. And when you look at the patterns, the royal fallout seems less like a tragedy and more like the inevitable climax of a script Meghan had been writing all along. The lights of Hollywood fade. The gates of Buckingham Palace loom. And what happens next is the royal fallout that would shock the world. What happens when the fairy tale turns sour? What happens when the girl who once stood smiling at the gates of Windsor Castle, basking in the cheers of a nation, suddenly finds herself in open war with the very family she married into? That's the story of Meghan Markle's royal fallout, a chapter filled with grandeur, bitterness, and betrayal. And when you lay it next to the accusations of Thomas, Samantha, and even Doria's quiet distance, the pattern becomes chillingly clear. At first, the entry seemed like a dream. The world remembers those first images. Meghan, radiant in her engagement photos with Harry, draped in a white coat, flashing a dazzling smile as Harry declared she was the one. Britain seemed ready to embrace her. The monarchy, bruised by years of scandal, had a new chapter, the prince's modern, independent bride. Meghan was American. She was biracial. She was a symbol of change, of progress, of a monarchy stepping into the 21st century. For a moment, it looked like the perfect match between tradition and modernity. But the cracks appeared quickly. Meghan's family drama followed her into the palace, the staged photos, the media interviews, the sisters' jabs. And while the royals had weathered scandals before, Meghan's came with a twist. She wasn't just being attacked by outsiders. She was in conflict with her own bloodline. The Markles versus the Windsors. It was chaos before she even walked down the aisle. Still, the wedding day came. Meghan, stunning in her Givenchy gown, walked herself partly down the aisle before being met by Prince Charles. The world swooned. But behind the scenes, whispers were already circulating. Staff reportedly described Meghan as demanding. Stories leaked about a pre-wedding clash with Kate Middleton over bridesmaids' dresses. Tears were shed, but whose tears they were became a point of bitter debate. Meghan would later insist she was the one who cried, flipping the narrative that had painted her as the aggressor. Already, the war of perception had begun. Ask yourself, why did this story catch fire so quickly? Because it wasn't just about dresses. It was about the image of Meghan that insiders and family alike were starting to describe, a woman who, behind closed doors, wasn't the gracious, smiling humanitarian she appeared to be. Instead, she was described as controlling, sharp, and unyielding. Does that sound familiar? Because it echoes exactly what Samantha had been saying for years. Now let's turn to the palace machine. The royal family, often referred to as the firm, is an institution obsessed with image. Every smile, every wave, every step is choreographed. For Meghan, who was used to controlling her own narrative, this was suffocating. She felt silenced, trapped, unable to speak for herself. In her interview with Oprah, she described moments of despair so deep she considered taking her own life. That confession was raw, emotional, and shocking. It painted Meghan as a victim of an institution that valued protocol over humanity. But here's where the family's voices complicate the story. Because Thomas and Samantha tell a different version. They say Meghan wasn't a victim of the palace. She was a manipulator within it. They argue that she played the victim card to garner sympathy, while in reality, she was demanding and isolating. And palace staff whispers back up that idea, using words like bully and tyrant. The irony is heavy. The woman who claimed to be silenced is accused of silencing others. Consider the emotional irony. Meghan told Oprah the royals failed to protect her. But Thomas says Meghan failed to protect him when the press attacked. Meghan says the institution cut her off. Samantha says Meghan cut her off. The roles are reversed again and again, leaving us with one chilling possibility. Maybe Meghan's greatest talent is flipping the script, always casting herself as the victim while casting others as the villains. The fallout escalated quickly. Meghan and Harry stepped back from royal duties, announcing they wanted to carve their own path. Megxit, the press called it. The Queen issued a statement filled with dignity, but the undertones were clear. The couple's decision was a disappointment. Harry gave up his military titles. The couple moved to California. And the monarchy, once brimming with hope for its newest modern face, was left fractured. But let's connect this to the family pattern. Meghan's royal fallout wasn't an isolated event. It mirrored what had already happened with her father and sister. Once again, the same script played out. Closeness at first, then conflict, then estrangement. The people who once celebrated her became the people she claimed mistreated her. The institution that embraced her became the institution she accused of cruelty. Ask yourself this. How many times can the same story repeat before it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like a pattern? Thomas was discarded. Samantha was erased. Trevor Engelson, her first husband, was left behind. Old Hollywood friends faded into silence. And now the royal family, one of the most powerful institutions in the world, was cast as the villain. Every time, Meghan stood in the spotlight as the wronged figure. Every time, those she left behind insisted she was the one holding the knife. The fallout with the royals was devastating for the monarchy itself. Prince William and Harry, once inseparable, grew distant. The Queen, in her twilight years, faced one of the biggest scandals of her reign. Prince Charles, now king, had to manage the optics of a son who publicly criticized his family. And in the center of it all was Meghan. But here's the chilling question. If Meghan could divide the most famous family in the world, what does that say about the smaller, quieter betrayals with Thomas and Samantha? Were they simply practice runs for the bigger stage? The emotional weight of this fallout cannot be overstated. Because family is one thing. Siblings fight. Parents and children clash. But the monarchy is an institution designed to endure. And yet Meghan's arrival shook it to its core. If she could unravel the royal family, then perhaps the accusations from Thomas, Samantha, and even Doria aren't exaggerations at all. They're glimpses of the very traits that made Meghan both magnetic and destructive. And here's where the cliffhanger lands. Because if Meghan's royal fallout exposed her as divisive, as manipulative, as someone willing to burn bridges for her narrative, then what does that mean for her future? What does it mean for Harry, who has followed her down this path of estrangement and isolation? The next part of this story doesn't just question Meghan's role in family betrayal. It asks whether Meghan's greatest performance of all has been her public persona as a victim. Because if the mask really is slipping, then the question isn't just whether she betrayed her family. It's whether the world itself has been betrayed by believing in her. And that's where we turn next, the victim narrative exposed. What if the one narrative Meghan Markle has leaned on most, the story of her as the wronged outsider, the silenced victim, was never as clear-cut as she wanted us to believe? What if the victim card, so often played in interviews and documentaries, is the most powerful performance of her career? That's the unsettling question at the center of this chapter. Is Meghan truly a victim, or has she mastered the art of appearing like one? Let's start with the most infamous moment, the Oprah Winfrey interview. Millions of people around the world tuned in as Meghan and Harry sat down under the California sun and revealed their truth. Meghan described the monarchy as cold and indifferent, an institution more concerned with optics than with her mental health. She spoke of feeling silenced, of being denied help when she was at her lowest, of dark thoughts that consumed her. Harry backed her up, saying his wife and son were victims of racism and cruelty. It was shocking, raw, and devastating. For many, Meghan instantly became a symbol of resilience against a heartless machine. But here's the contradiction. While Meghan was telling the world she was silenced, she was simultaneously broadcasting her story on the largest media stage imaginable. She wasn't silent. She was carefully controlling the narrative. She wasn't voiceless. She was the loudest voice in the room. This is where the victim persona becomes complicated. Because being silenced means you can't speak. Meghan was speaking. And she wasn't just speaking. She was speaking to Oprah, one of the most influential interviewers in the world, with an audience of millions. Ask yourself, can someone who secures a platform that massive truly be a victim of silence? Or are they leveraging victimhood as a powerful tool for sympathy and credibility? Now, let's connect this to her family's accusations. Samantha Markle has long claimed that Meghan is a master manipulator who knows how to play roles to perfection. And what is the victim role if not one of the most effective roles in the modern era? Victimhood garners empathy. Victimhood draws loyalty. Victimhood silences critics, because who wants to attack someone already suffering? Meghan's family insists that her public displays of vulnerability are not reflections of her reality, but strategies in her arsenal. Thomas Markle echoes this sentiment. He points to his own estrangement and says Meghan flipped the narrative. She made it seem like he abandoned her, when in his telling, she abandoned him. He says she painted him as the betrayer, while he sees himself as the betrayed. Do you see the pattern? Meghan doesn't just cut ties. She frames the break in a way that positions her as the victim and the other party as the villain. Here's another contradiction worth noting. Meghan's activism often centers around female empowerment, finding one's voice, and fighting injustice. Yet her critics, family, staff, even palace insiders, say she thrives on silencing others, controlling narratives, and wielding power in ways that contradict her message. It's the ultimate irony, the champion of empowerment accused of disempowering those closest to her. Let's add another layer. Harry. Many see Harry as Meghan's greatest proof of victimhood, that he was willing to give up everything for her because of how much she suffered. But others see it differently. They see Harry as the ultimate pawn in Meghan's narrative. By attaching himself to her story of suffering, Harry not only validated her claims, but also isolated himself from his own family. If Meghan's victim narrative is a performance, then Harry may be the most tragic supporting actor. Here's the emotional spike. Meghan's public tears, her trembling voice, her claims of near collapse. These are powerful images. They stir sympathy. They make headlines. But her family argues those tears dry quickly once the cameras are gone. That behind closed doors, compassion is replaced with cold calculation. And if that's true, then Meghan's victim persona isn't just misleading, it's manipulative. But let's be fair. Is it possible that Meghan is a victim in some ways and manipulative in others? That she has genuinely suffered under the weight of media scrutiny and royal coldness, while also knowing how to maximize that suffering for her benefit? Because that duality is what makes her such a divisive figure. People don't just argue about Meghan. They argue about what she represents. To some, she's the silenced woman who spoke truth to power. To others, she's the actress who turned victimhood into her most profitable role. The question, then, is this: when does victimhood stop being real and start being performance? When it becomes a pattern. And Meghan's pattern is undeniable. Father, estranged, framed as betrayer. Sister, estranged, framed as bitter and jealous. Royals, estranged, framed as racist and cruel. Friends, distant, framed as untrustworthy. In every case, Meghan emerges as the victim. Every time. No exceptions. But can one woman truly be the victim of everyone in her orbit? Or is it more likely that she has mastered the role of victimhood to maintain power and control? That's the contradiction we're left with, and it's one that eats away at the heart of Meghan's story. Now think about the emotional payoff for Meghan. Victimhood has given her sympathy. It has given her Harry's unwavering devotion. It has given her multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, opportunities that hinged on her personal story. Victimhood, in Meghan's hands, isn't just identity, its currency. And here's the chilling twist. Victimhood is fragile. It works as long as the audience believes. But the moment cracks appear, the moment the mask slips, it collapses. And Meghan's family, by breaking their silence, may have provided those cracks. Because if the world begins to doubt the authenticity of her suffering, then everything built on that image, every deal, every brand, every future opportunity, could crumble. So here's the cliffhanger. What if Meghan's most convincing victim isn't her father or her sister or the royals? What if her greatest victim is Harry himself? Because the next part of this story isn't just about Meghan's performance. It's about whether she has isolated Harry, manipulated him, and turned him against everyone who once loved him. And if that's true, then the victim narrative collapses entirely, because it reveals Meghan not as the silenced, but as the silencer, not as the victim, but as the manipulator. And that brings us to the next chapter. Harry, the manipulated prince. What happens when love becomes isolation? What happens when a man who once stood as one of the most beloved royals in the world, war hero, cheeky brother, Diana's spirited son, suddenly cuts himself off from everything and everyone who shaped him? That is the haunting question at the center of Prince Harry's story. Because while Meghan Markle has painted herself as the woman silenced by the monarchy, her family and critics suggest something darker. That Harry, too, may be a victim, not of the royals, but of Meghan herself. Let's step back. Prince Harry wasn't just any royal. He was the golden boy of the monarchy, the one who brought humanity and humor to an ancient institution. He was the soldier who served in Afghanistan, the prince who hugged children with no hesitation, the rebel who sometimes embarrassed the palace but won the people's hearts. Harry was Diana's son through and through, compassionate, reckless, authentic. And for years, the public adored him for it. But today, Harry is estranged from his brother, distant from his father, and alienated from the very institution that defined his life. How did this happen? The answer, some argue, lies in Meghan. Think about the pattern. Meghan's family claims she has a history of isolating herself from those who no longer serve her narrative. Her father, cut off. Her sister, erased. Her Hollywood friends, silent. Her ex-husband, discarded. Now, Harry's story follows the same script. Since marrying Meghan, Harry has drifted, or been pushed, further and further from the people who once anchored him. His bond with William, once unshakable, now seems irreparably fractured. His relationship with Charles, now king, is strained to the breaking point. Even his beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, passed away with tensions unresolved. Is that coincidence? Or is it control? Consider this. In Meghan's version of events, Harry stood by her as she was vilified and abandoned. But in the version her family presents, Meghan systematically cut Harry off from his support systems, ensuring she became his only lifeline. Samantha has accused Meghan of isolating Harry emotionally, convincing him the royals were toxic, untrustworthy, and racist. Thomas, too, has said Meghan manipulates situations to cast herself as the victim and everyone else as the villain. And when you put those claims together, a chilling picture emerges. Meghan as the manipulator, Harry as the manipulated. Here's the emotional irony. Harry once accused the royals of trapping him in an institution he couldn't escape. But what if, in leaving, he simply walked into another kind of trap? What if the freedom he thought he was gaining was actually a cage built by Meghan's influence? A cage where every bridge to his past was burned, leaving him with no choice but to cling to her. Now let's talk about Harry's transformation. Before Meghan, Harry was known for his rowdy friendships, his love of the military, his connection to ordinary people. After Meghan, those connections seem severed. Former military friends have spoken of feeling shut out. Longtime pals from his pre-Meghan days no longer appear in his life. Even his relationship with the press, once cheeky and cooperative, has turned bitter and hostile. Harry seems to have cut every tie that linked him to the man he used to be. And every tie cut only makes him more dependent on Meghan. Ask yourself, is this devotion, or is it manipulation? Because devotion is rooted in choice, while manipulation is rooted in control. Let's add an emotional spike here. Meghan told Oprah that she once contemplated suicide, and Harry revealed that he felt trapped between his wife's despair and his family's indifference. Imagine the pressure that placed on him. Imagine the guilt, the fear, The overwhelming sense that if he didn't choose Meghan, he might lose her forever. That kind of emotional weight can bind a person completely. And if Meghan truly used that despair as a tool, intentionally or not, then Harry's devotion may be less about love and more about fear. This isn't to say Harry doesn't love Meghan. Clearly, he does. But love and manipulation can coexist, especially when one partner controls